Hey, what's going on, everyone? Today we're going to go over Windows Server 2019 installation. It's going to be my first video for the channel. So we're going to start with that. Then we're going to go into configuring an Active Directory along with configuring the DNS server. And then later on connecting a Windows Enterprise Edition to that domain. So let's just go ahead and get started. So this is already loaded. I use the Evaluation Edition for Microsoft. It's a free edition, so it's kind of good for a learning environment. So right off the bat, obviously there's going to be the default settings as far as language goes. So we're just going to go ahead and click next. Install now. Alright, so the next screen will kind of bring up the different options that we have available for the 2019 server. For my purpose, for today's purpose, we're going to go with the standard evaluation desktop experience. For someone who has a little bit more experience or understands how to use the terminal behind Windows Server, they could go ahead and just do the standard evaluation. But I'm going to stick to the GUI. So we're just going to go ahead and hit next. We're going to accept the license terms. So at this point, it's asking what type of installation do you want. So I'm starting fresh. So I don't have anything installed on this computer or this hard drive. It's a virtual environment. I'm going to go ahead with the custom install Windows only. The next screen will bring up the hard drive that we are going to be using, that we've allocated some space for. The minimum that I noticed was 14 gigabytes it required, so we upped it to 15 gigabytes. So at this point, there's nothing on this hard drive. It is just free. 15 gigs allocated specifically for this purpose. So we're just going to go ahead and hit next. We're just going to let it rock. It's going to install. It's going to take like probably 10-15 minutes. So we'll just fast forward. And here we are. So the next screen is going to bring us to our login settings. So we're going to just stick to obviously the default administrator. Later on, if we wanted to, we could go ahead and change that. Just make a default password. Obviously, if we were in a business environment, we would want to make that as strong as possible. But for lab, virtualized, separated from our physical network, we should be alright. And log in. Give it probably another 5 minutes or so. Alright, so after waiting a few minutes, the dashboard is going to pop up. This is what you're going to see for your server. Before we get started and install new features, we're going to go ahead and configure a static IP. We'll go down at the bottom, open network internet settings. We're going to go to change adapter options. Right click, properties. We're going to stick with IPv4. So right now, obviously, as you can see, it's going to be set up for DHCP. We're going to set a static IP, like I said. So we're going to go with this. We're going to set our subnet mask. To 255.255.255. Default gateway, be that, and then you set the preferred DNS server to static IP we set above. Okay, close. That should be done. It should identify in a few minutes. Also, you want to go down to local server, so you can confirm that the IP had there we go. IP has been configured. Top, we're going to go to manage. Add roles and features. This is going to be the default screen that pops up every time. We can skip this page by default. You can go ahead and read it. Some things that I'll remind you about is, like we just did, setting the static IP. We're going to stick to the role-based or feature-based installation. Alright, so after refreshing, as you can see, the static IP populated. Now we shouldn't get that issue. So go back in, Active Directory Domain Services, add features, DNS Server, add features, next. Just some stuff to worry about there. It also mentions the Azure. You can go ahead if you want to. You can restart the destination server automatically. I'm going to go ahead and just leave that empty. I will do it after I promote this to a domain controller. Just going to go ahead and install. Alright, looks like the installation has been complete. So we'll go ahead and hit close. So before we do anything else, we're going to make sure that we want to promote this to a domain controller. So you're going to go at the top, click the little flag, as you can see. I'm going to go ahead, select this, promote this server to a domain controller. It's going to load up for a second. Just to go over this real quick, it's going to ask for a deployment operation. Gives us 3 options. Since this is a new environment, we're going to go ahead and add a new forest. Name that you specify here is going to be important as far as joining other computers and devices to this domain. Alright, so the loading has completed. Go ahead, add a new forest. The root domain name, we're going to do cyberme.local. Hit next. The next screen is going to pop up. It's going to be the domain controller options. So at the top, you're going to see the functional levels for the forest and the domain. To my understanding, it's not going to show 2019, but we want to use the latest version available. So we're going to go ahead with server 2016 for both. I'm going to go ahead and leave these default. We're going to set a password. Go ahead and hit next. We're not going to do any of this DNS delegation. I'm going to go ahead and next. The net BIOS name is going to be the name of the domain. We're just going to go ahead and leave that default once it pops up. There we go, CyberMe. Next. These are going to be the default settings that we're also going to leave alone, but it's just good to know as far as the different locations for the folders that are associated with the Active Directory services. So you get database, your log, and your volume down here. So next. This is going to be everything that we just opted for in the previous screens. Next. It's going to do some prerequisites, it's going to do some checking, make sure everything's good to go. Once it pops up saying it's good, you're just going to go ahead and hit install. Alright, there we go. So we're looking for that green check mark along the top. There's going to be some things in here that's not crazy important as far as getting the server up and running. So we're going to look for that green check mark. Go ahead, hit install. Just keep in mind that it says if you click install, the server will automatically reboot at the end of the promotion operation. Just going to let that run, do its thing, and then once it's done and once it's rebooted, we'll just come back. Alright, the server just did a reboot, so we're back at the login screen. So now you should see the domain name that we had set, so CyberMe, slash the user that we're logging in with, so administrator. Alright, now that we let it load for a little bit, we have the settings that I was discussing earlier on the left hand side. So we got Active Directory settings, DNS settings, and we also see it here at the bottom. I'm going to go to Tools at the top, go to DNS. So for the rest of this video, we're just going to go ahead and configure the DNS server. We're going to make a part 2. That part 2 is going to focus on the Active Directory side of things as far as configuring a user, and then we'll join another device to the domain. So for DNS, if you're not sure what DNS is, I'll do a kind of a quick summary. Better explain it real quick and see command prompt. So we have two options. We have a forward lookup zone and a reverse lookup zone. Actually, this is going to be horrible to explain because I'm not connected to the internet. I'll just explain it. So if you were on your computer that's connected to the internet and you went to the command prompt, you would be able to go to ping google.com, and then that should resolve an IP address that is known as the forward lookup zone. Now if you were to do the same thing, if you were to ping the IP address of Google, then it would pull the name, and that'd be a reverse lookup zone. It's kind of hard to explain. As far as Google goes, I thought it'd be a good idea, but obviously I'm not connected to the internet, so that's not going to work. But I will be able to explain it using NS Lookup in a minute. Alright, so the forward lookup zone right here, this is going to be pretty much set up after automatically setting up this whole DNS server from what we just covered earlier. So if you went to CyberMe Local, you're going to see the host A record right here, and that's associated with this IP address. Obviously it's going to be static. Then we got the reverse lookup zone. And that is not set up yet. So we're going to go ahead and right click it, new zone. Next, we're going to keep the primary zone. We're going to keep that default as well. We're going to stick to IPv4. Here's going to be the IP address that we want to resolve. Just the first three. Go ahead and hit next. We're going to allow secure dynamic updates, and then we're going to click finish. Alright, so now we see that this is created. One more thing we have to do is create a pointer record. So we're going to go ahead and hit browse for the host name. We're going to find the server that we're trying to set up. It's going to be this one. Forward lookup zones. Click the domain that we just configured. You can click the host A record I was just showing you earlier. Hit OK. Hit OK. There we go. Now we have a reverse lookup zone. So this will allow us to communicate using an IP address, which will resolve the name. So go ahead, hit NS Lookup. And we'll start with using the IP address. So if we went to 10.0.0.100, this should obviously bring up the computer name. And then if we did it the other way around, we should still get, now we should get the IP address. To show you that if it wasn't set up, let's go ahead and we'll just delete these. So we'll delete the reverse lookup zone we just created. Now we can't use the IP address. So if we went into NS Lookup, it's not going to resolve it. But we could still use the name, right? So if we went ahead and deleted the host A record, now we try to use the name, it's not going to resolve anything. Just real quick, so kind of go over how to put that back on there. If you want to play around with that as well, just go ahead and hit new host. We'll just put the name that we had before, obviously, and then we're going to use the same IP address. If you leave this selected, create associated pointer, it's not going to let you, obviously, because it's still there from earlier. We didn't delete the pointer. So just hit OK. Close. And now we have this. And then you would be able to do the name again. That's the forward lookup zone. Alright everyone, so that's it for today. So we just went over installing Active Directory and the DNS server, along with installing the Windows Server 2019. That's going to be part one. We're going to split it up into two parts. So the next part is going to be kind of quick. It'll kind of go over how to configure Active Directory a little bit, explain some settings they need to change. We're going to add a user to the domain, and then we're going to go ahead and bring up another virtual machine to join that environment to the domain. Awesome. I hope you enjoyed it. This is the first video, so kind of bear with me, but I plan on keeping this going. I enjoy sharing what I learn, and I love learning, so never stop learning.